It was because I was really compelled to listen to the call of my own heart, to do the things that I knew I came here to do. So it requires kind of a conscientiousness, first of all, about what's in your soul. What are you coded for? What are you designed for? How are you meant to be sharing your gifts, talents, and abilities? So that's one thing. And the other thing is that I believe that confusion is actually a mask for not allowing yourself to have the thing that you know that you want to have.
Hello, hello, beautiful people on the other side of this podcast. Welcome to Hi Vibin. If you are new here, this is hopefully going to be one of your favorite podcasts ever. Every week we come to you with inspirational content to help you live your best life, feel empowered, heal your emotions, love yourself, go in the direction of your dreams, all that beautiful stuff. We stand for quality of life and raising your vibration. So we are here to help you do that. Unfortunately, my co-host, Lindsay Robinson, she's a hypnotherapist. She's awesome. One of my best friends, she lost her voice. I think this is like for the first time ever in podcast history. So if you're like, where's Lindsay? She is currently taking a nap, which is the best thing she could be doing. So everyone send the good healing vibes to Lindsay and her throat so that she can come back next week and be on. But in the meantime, I have a wonderful guest today who is going to just light up your earbuds. I'm super excited to have her on. Her name is Dr. Robyn Mckay. She's an author. She is the queen of self-actualization. She's an intuitive channel, a podcast host, ADHD and spiritual entrepreneurs media expert, and an award-winning psychologist. So as if that wasn't enough things, I would love to have Robyn explain in her own words how she helps people, what she does, and tell us a little bit about how you came to this work, your story into it, as it were.
I love stories. Thank you so much for having me on. And I have to tell you, if you hear thunder in the background, I've got a major weather system coming through right now in Scottsdale, Arizona. I think they held off until after all the things yesterday. We had the Super Bowl, we had the golf tournament, like all the things. So, and I told everybody, don't bet against the Chiefs. And I was right.
I will curse you and your family.
Well, it was so funny. My husband was going to bet against the Chiefs, and I told him, and usually I don't care, like whatever, but I told him on no certain terms, do not bet against the Chiefs. And he listened to me, and he was glad that he listened to me.
Happy wife, happy life. That's what they say.
Exactly. I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy to be here, and we will miss Lindsay, and I can't wait to connect with her at some point as well. But you asked a whole bunch of questions about how I got started in this work. And I was thinking about, I always wonder about the point of entry for this. I think that where I want to start is that I had a quarter life crisis when I was about 27 or 28. When I looked around my life, it was a good life. I was married to my college sweetheart. We were living in Kansas City area. So there's my Chiefs connection. And I had wanted to be a doctor and write books from the time I was like 5 years old. I knew that all those years ago. I knew I was supposed to be doing that. And I hadn't been doing that. Instead, I had been working in the biotech and pharmaceutical industry as a clinical scientist, a writer. I was married, and he was a good guy. It wasn't that at all. I looked around my life at that point, and I found a picture of me from when I graduated from high school. Remember those high school graduation pictures, the cap and gown? My eyes were bright. I was so excited. I looked like I had the world by the tail. And that was 10 years before. When I found that picture at 27 or 28, I was like, okay, where are you? Because you're not here. And this is not the life that I imagined for myself. And it was really in that moment that I started asking different questions and dove pretty deeply into an existential crisis, I will say. I called it a quarter life crisis, but really it was like, what am I doing with my life? And it was soon after that my husband and I decided to get divorced. I went back to school almost immediately to get my master's degree in psychology. And at the same time, I had all of these spiritual questions opening as well. I had been intuitive from the time I was a little girl, but I never fully owned it. In other words, it was a thing that I could do, like I would know stuff and not really know why I knew it. I would have downloads for papers that I had to write or whatever. Like I had all of these abilities, but didn't understand. And certainly
You're fine. I can cut it out.
Okay, sorry.
No
I thought I
worries.
had turned that
Happens
off.
to me
Okay.
literally every time I record. I'm like, oh,
Okay.
my sister's calling. Oh, my mom's calling.
Oh,
You guys know
that's
I record
probably
on
my
Monday.
sister. I kind of want to look and see. Okay. So all this to say, I apologize for them. Now I'm distracted because I also have ADHD.
No worries. You're good.
So I had all of these spiritual questions as well. And I really started undergoing a deep transformation on the spiritual level as well, which led into a 7-year apprenticeship in spiritual intelligence, along with getting my PhD in psychology. So I really had these two kind of integrated areas that were emerging at that time. So that's how I came into being a psychologist. Is all those years ago, I knew I was supposed to be a doctor. I had my quarter life crisis and really just turned the corner on living out my purpose, even at the expense of the public expense, if you will, of divorcing my husband and starting my life over and doing all the things that now has become more commonplace. But this was 20 years ago. So it was a little bit of a different vibe around leaving marriages and things like that. So that's how I arrived here. My quest has always been around self-actualization. On my Instagram, I'm a little cheeky. I say I'm the queen of self-actualization. I don't think that anybody fully actualizes in this life, but I do think that when you're on a quest to fully develop yourself as a human being, to figure out what your gifts, talents, and abilities are, what your mission is as a soulful spiritual being, those are all parts of the process of self-actualizing, of living into your fullest potential, of extracting yourself from any kind of programming or mindsets or trauma that might be blocking you from expressing your highest potential. And that's what I spend my life doing now, is really working with people in that area. They come a lot from the place of, who am I? What am I supposed to be doing now? There's a lot of existential crisis and existential angst going on in the world right now, appropriately so.
Yeah.
And so that's usually when people come into me, is like, they're like, WTF is going on?
Yeah. What the F is my life? And this doesn't
what
quite
even
feel
is this?
like the fit anymore. Your story, I'm sure, is so relatable and it's really beautiful and powerful. And thank you for sharing that. And when you were like, yeah, my story begins with like a quarter life crisis, I was just thinking like, yeah, it happens to the best of us. Because my story, and
really
also
does.
the people who come on our podcast, lots of people who are into personal development and on the spiritual healing path, like it all starts with, you know, hitting the wall or the pain threshold or the crisis of some kind. So it is interesting how a lot of our stories, the interesting part really starts there, you know, the contrast before the expansion. It's just like classic, you know, happens to the best of us. If anyone's out there listening, like, oh, I'm going through it right now, know that it's not in vain. You're gonna come out the other side. It's like really designed to give you a mirror to help you access more clarity, and with the clarity and information and personal truths, you can go in a more authentic direction for yourself, something that lights you up more, feels more exciting, feels more in alignment. So, and I think you hit the nail on the head perfectly too, with this is a time where so much transition is happening collectively, but also individually in people's lives, whether it's work or relationship. There are many huge changes. And I think COVID, part of the silver lining of that era was to help people really reevaluate things, right? We're spending so much time at home, so much time in our heads, so much time with ourselves. And I think a lot of people realized, the way I've been living my life recently up until this point maybe isn't feeling that great to me anymore. It's not really working for me the way that I want it to. I'm feeling called to something more. And before we hopped on the call, I was really excited to speak with you, especially about the topic of like going for or going in the direction of your gifts, whether that means leaving your job or your relationship or whatever part of your life is no longer working for you. Because I think that is a really timely topic. And I know there are a lot of people just in my world, coaching clients. I know people who listen to the podcast who are wanting to shift out of something as big in their life as a job into something else, but they're not quite sure like what that something else is. So they're really just in a place of like clarity that I want to leave, but confusion of like where I want to go type of space. So I'm curious, your thoughts on that. And I would love to hear more about like your transition, whether it was like the mindset that helped you to shift out of confusion, or what was it that helped you the most, you feel like, to move into a space of leaving your steady job to do your own thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. You know, in my PhD program, I actually focused on career development and really understanding the vocational psychology piece of things. And so I was able to simultaneously, as I was studying this, I was actually going through my own job transitions as well. And one of the pieces of research I think is so interesting is that people at this point don't change jobs just 5 times throughout their lifetime. That used to be kind of the general feeling, is that we would change jobs, stay in the same field, change jobs. Now people are changing careers at least 5 times across their lifespan. So I was kind of an early adopter of this. And when I look back at how I shifted my career from the time I was in undergrad and I was running a swim school, then I moved into biotech. My undergrad is in biology, and I thought I would go to medical school. But when I didn't get in the first time I applied, I didn't have somebody around saying, listen, just go back and try again. I leapt into biotech, and I spent 5 or so years in biotech, moving into psychology, and I've just always made these little pivots in my career that didn't always make sense, especially to most people who were still in the thinking of, I have to stay in the same job with the same, company from the time I start until I retire and get a gold watch and, go, golf and whatever retired people do these days. So one of the things that I came to terms with early on in my process was I was never confused. I was never, it wasn't that I didn't have some push and pull with leaving, but it wasn't because of confusion. It was because I was really compelled to listen to the call of my own heart, to do the things that I knew I came here to do. So it requires kind of a conscientiousness, first of all, about what's in your soul. What are you coded for? What are you designed for? How are you meant to be sharing your gifts, talents, and abilities? So that's one thing. And the other thing is that I believe that confusion is actually a mask for not allowing yourself to have the thing that you know that you want to have or that you desire.
Yes. It's like
Does that
you
make
don't
sense?
want to admit to your desire, so you just pretend to yourself that you're
Yeah, I'm just
confused.
confused. It's like going to the restaurant and seeing the menu and seeing the thing that you want, but maybe it's too expensive, or maybe it's too many calories, or maybe. And so then you say, oh, I'm confused. Well, are you really?
Right.
Or are you just not allowing yourself to have the thing that you desire?
Mm.
So I think that that's an important consideration when you are making the decision to leave your career. You might also be processing through other people's confusion about what the F is she actually doing, leaving this steady job and her insurance and her 401k and whatever it is in order to pursue this other thing. Certainly that has been the case in my life. Most recently, I'll share the story that this was 10 years ago. I was still working at the university, at Arizona State University. I was a psychologist. I had won some awards for my work. I had started a new program for gifted kids that was all about positive psychology. From the outside looking in, it looked like I had gotten the gold stars and everything. And inside I was like, oof, like I'm feeling really like I need to go again. But I had a lot of guilt about leaving the students that I was working with. I had the story in my head was, I'll just wait for them to graduate and then I'll go. Like, really? What even is that? And it wasn't even until I had this moment where I was like, how dare I tell these students and teach them to follow their dreams, to live their best lives, to live into their potential when I'm not doing that? How dare I? And that was kind of another turning point for me where I was like, holy smokes, I really don't have an excuse anymore to do this thing other than it's scary as shit to leave a full like. And here's the thing, and you might relate to this. I was working at a major university. I had a big brand behind me. And that was something that I had to come to terms with as I was stepping out into my own as an executive coach to do this work that I'm doing now. Who am I if I am not affiliated with a major university?
Yeah.
So there was that kind of, I was almost, I was almost captivated by the headline of who I worked for, when it was a pretty uneven relationship, other than,
Right.
obviously they paid me for my work. But I think that was something that I didn't expect. Again, it wasn't confusion. It was just like, like, who am I if I'm not this? I better have a really cool brand that I can step into in order for me to feel okay about leaving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's reminding me of like what a lot of people go through when they're going through this or have gone through this is the identity shift and like the ego
Mm-hmm.
death that has to
Oh, yeah.
happen in order to step into your new version of yourself. So, like, my fiance used to play professional football, but now he's in sales. And that
Mm-hmm.
was a really hard transition for him to
Yep.
go from I'm this professional athlete. I was like sculpted by God to like use my body in this really physically demanding way and like never let the team down and like entertain America. And like I was meant to do all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, like you're not that. And then you're just like, okay, what am I? And I had a similar
Mm-hmm.
thing. I was actually training my whole life to be a professional ballerina. And then
Yes.
I became injured. So I kind of fell into the work of hairstyling because I was always really good at that. And I suffered a huge identity crisis and spiritual awakening in that moment of like, I'm nothing if I'm not a dancer.
Mm-hmm.
And you tie all your worth to
Yeah.
what you do, which obviously isn't all your worth, but it's easy to get wrapped up in that when you've dedicated your life or a certain amount of your life to it. So for anyone who's listening, that's like, yeah, just know you're not
Mm-hmm.
alone. This happens to a
Mm-hmm.
lot of us. And it's normal to, have to almost like mourn that part of yourself, or just stepping into the new identity can be scary or hard or heavy. And I'm glad that we're just having this conversation to normalize the experience of how fearful it can be to let go of your old self or your old title or your old coworkers or your old clients. Even like right now I'm transitioning out of doing hair, and when you were talking about feeling like you couldn't leave your students and then you're like, oh, I have to do it, I was thinking of myself and I was like, yeah, it's pretty easy to use your clients or your team or the people you work with or
Mm-hmm.
work for as the excuse to hold yourself back. But I kind of feel like it's almost like when really unhappy married couples with kids are like, we have to stay together for the
Yeah.
kids, but they're both suffering and it creates a lot of drama in the household and everybody can feel it. And it's like, is that really the example you want to set? Or should you just live your best life and, bless your ex and move on, and your kids will be happier too, even though they might have divorced parents in the long run? Like, it reminds me of that situation too. So I think you brought up a really good point of like following our hearts, not always super easy, but you have to admit to yourself what you desire. And then I feel like the next step, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you got to admit to what you want. And then you have to commit to what you want, because a lot of people, especially in the law of attraction space, are like, oh, if I just think about it, it'll happen. It's like, if you don't commit to it, it's not going to happen. I'm sorry, but it's probably not
Yeah.
going to happen.
I saw a meme recently. I do a lot with people with ADHD. I have ADHD myself. A lot of people with ADHD who I work with are highly intuitive, they're creative, and they've also got this label. So, there's so many really good Instagram accounts for ADHD, and some of them have memes. So, there's one meme of 5 blackbirds sitting on a fence. And the question is, 4 of them decide to fly off the fence. How many are left on the fence? And the answer is 5, because just because you decide something doesn't mean
Right.
that you've actually taken action. A lot of times, especially with people who have ADHD, it's that inner volition that there's a word for it that completely escapes me right now. It'll come back around, but just that the stepping into the unknown or the taking action after the decision, that's the challenge. And there's that whole leap and then the net will appear, build the plane while you're flying it, all of those things. It's just, if you stay trapped in the decision spiral, I decided but I'm not doing anything, that creates a lot of angst as well. And that's why I think it's so important for those of us on the actualization journey to have partnerships with coaches, with mentors, with people who can kind of stabilize us during those leaps, because in fact, this is a journey that we're not meant to do by ourselves.
Yeah.
And you know what? Here's the other thing I want to share with you. When I left ASU, all those years ago. I made the decision to leave. I walked into the director's office. I slid my letter of resignation across her desk, and she kind of sat back and was a little surprised. And then when she thought about it, she could understand why there had been some things that had kind of taken place that made sense why I was leaving. But after I left, I had a major trauma response. Like major. Remember I was at my sister's house afterwards, and I was having a panic attack, and I'm laying on the couch sobbing, like, and not like pretty like tears, but like gnashing my teeth, and like really a physical trauma response. And she stopped me and she said, "Did they ask you to leave?" And then I got pissed. I'm like, "No, of course they didn't." She said, "Well, you're crying as though you didn't have a choice." And it was in that moment, I'm always grateful. I've got two sisters, and this is the one who's the truth teller. And she's the one who is one of my partners in crime. Like, she's probably the one who earlier in the episode called when we were talking, right? So just that idea that she was there in that moment to witness the trauma that I was experiencing, the panic that I was experiencing, to say what she saw so that I could make a different decision, so that there was something that was unconscious that needed to become conscious in that moment. And then to move with me through this whole process of evolving my career, evolving myself, meeting my divine life partner along the way, like all of these things that have unfolded as a result of me just saying yes to my most deeply held desires, which was to have this thriving business, to work with spiritual entrepreneurs and leaders and CEOs and all the people whose lives I touch and who contribute to my life immensely as well, and to get to meet people like you as well. So there are a lot of gifts in that, but stabilizing the nervous system, transforming the trauma, like these are the really critical points to make the transition easy. If you haven't transform the trauma, you're going to have trauma responses that are at some point are going to come forward to deal with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And it makes sense why it would be helpful to have someone who is knowledgeable in that space to hold your hand while you're going through it, so you don't feel like you're crazy and you don't feel like you shouldn't keep going in that direction. Because it's easy for people to let their fear stop them, because they make their fear mean that there's something to be afraid of. Yes. But it's like, just because you're scared doesn't necessarily mean there's actually something you need to be afraid of or anything you need to do about it, other than soothe yourself and realize that maybe the fear is, it's a psychological or a visceral response, but that doesn't mean you're actually in threat, right? It's all usually 99% of the time a perceived threat. So to make the distinction and move from there. I love that your sister said that to you, because I'm sure you were like, "F you, lady," like right in that moment. Like, how could you say that to me?
What are you even saying? Don't insult me like that,
so
sister.
rude.
Yeah.
But I love that she was like, tough love, in a tough, loving way, bringing you back to your empowerment. Like, remember that you chose this with your free will, girl.
Yeah.
Why are you playing? You chose this. Like, act like it.
The trauma response was just so pronounced that I really did have to get legit support for that as well, because I didn't realize back to the point about identity being wrapped up in what you do, who you work for, what your role is or whatever. But that was really unplugging energetically from the university created that. I was air quoting here, but giving up a full-time salary. I was giving up 401k and all of those things that the world would tell us is important. And it's not that they're not important, but there are other ways of creating that for yourself other than being kind of in that servitude matrix that can be created as a result of working for a corporate entity. So that, having that exit strategy and the energetics of the exit strategy supporting me was a big piece of the puzzle in order for me to come out on the other side and to be able to call in clients that were perfect for me and to have the experiences that I had traveling in Europe and developing my international coaching practice along the way. So those were the rate limiting steps, really. I'm going to call it this. It was a trauma response to the exit that was unlike anything I'd ever encountered before.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it sounds perfectly reasonable to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other piece that we haven't touched on that I would love to touch on that makes it scary for us is not only the identity piece, but it's the money factor, right? Because you're
Mm-hmm.
like,
Yeah.
oh, even if this isn't
Mm-hmm.
the exact amount I would want to make, at least I know I'm making it, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like
Right.
the
Yeah.
known, even if it's not perfect or your favorite preference, can feel better than the unknown, even if the
Yeah.
unknown could be 10 times better, right? So, what is your advice to people, I guess, who want to make the transition? They're scared out of their minds. They're having the identity collapse. They're scared about their financials. You did mention
Mm-hmm.
exit plans. So maybe we can talk a little bit of
Yeah.
strategy there. What are your
So
thoughts?
yeah, so money is an important consideration. And I do you ever see when people ask on social media, what advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah.
And um, I do a lot right now with wealth consciousness. And wealth consciousness is the capacity to attract, receive, and hold money. So, what I have said in the past is that before I left to pursue my big dreams in this executive coaching, spiritual development space, I knew how to sell high ticket. I was able to do that pretty consistently. I was able to have powerful sales conversations, create transformation for people. So I had that in place. Those pieces of wealth consciousness for me were in place. I knew how to attract and I knew how to receive. Here was the thing that I didn't know how to do, which was to hold it.
Mm.
Okay. So a lot of times we'll treat money like it's a hot potato. Oh, I have it all. I better spend it as fast as I can make it. It comes in and it goes out to some degree, but there is this ability to hold it and to bring more in, even when you're living in the excess. That can actually create a trauma response. Like if you're a little kid and you have your piggy bank, and your mom comes in and breaks your piggy bank and takes all your money away, why would you want to save if that's an early childhood experience that you've had? This whole notion of being able to hold wealth is something that is still pretty new to all humans, but especially to women. Remember, it wasn't until like 1974 that women in the US were actually permitted to have checking accounts without having a male signature on the account. So this is still a relatively new, I'm going to call it concept or experience for those of us who identify as women. And one of the things that I have had to learn over the past 10 years is really how to hold it, how to be able to look money in the eye and say, oh, this is wonderful. There's an excess there. I don't have to get rid of it. Nobody's going to take it from me.
Yeah.
Right. I'm a steward of these finances. So, in answer to your question, when you're getting ready to make the leap, the wealth consciousness piece, the capacity to attract, receive, and hold money is a piece of the puzzle that I don't think gets enough press, enough playtime in terms of what we're looking at. Because you get in a scramble, you get in trauma response, and then shit hits the fan, and you're like, where did all the clients go? Where did all the money go? And you get into a kind of a bad spot, or that's what's possible.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I always say is, make sure that you have money in your accounts before you decide to leave, for sure.
Yes.
Heal your trauma, especially the trauma around money.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
all have it. We all have money stories. We all have stuff that has happened between us and money, but heal that. And then really work on being able to, I'll call it channel wealth consciousness, being able to connect in with it, attract it, receive it, and hold it.
Yeah, that's great advice because I think the popular sexy piece of advice that like is floating around right now is like, oh, just go all in on your side hustle to make it your thing. And it's like, okay, maybe not everyone's in the position to do that because it's not very self-loving to stress yourself the fuck out financially in pursuit of following your dreams. Like there's a way to go for your dreams and also prepare and create some sort of financial safety for yourself.
Yes.
Maybe the path for you is make the plan and commit to leaving, but in the meantime, learn how to save, build your wealth, build a nest egg, have enough so that when you leave, you're not stressed to get clients, you're not stressed to make this thing work right away, because putting that pressure on yourself isn't really conducive to the flow and the abundance attraction that you want to be in, right? So it's like, in order to release your like strenuous, like need money now energy, which is never a good vibe to be in, do what you got to do beforehand and then move into the plan, you know?
It can
So,
be an easy, graceful process. And
yes.
here's what we know: the science of positive psychology. I love using this to illustrate the point that you're making about the stress does not help, right? When you're in scramble mode in a new business, what the science of positive psychology says is that the relationship between well-being and success is causal and bidirectional. So as you feel your best, you're going to create more success in any number of variables, including financial. And when you, for example, make more money, you're going to feel even better. So it gets on an upward spiral. But if you are stressed, yeah, you can still make money when you're stressed, but it's going to come at a cost. And eventually your system is going to, I'm going to use the word collapse around that stress response. You get into burnout, you get into surge capacity. And then what happens? How do you continue to attract in high level clients if you yourself are stressed? They can feel that. They may not say it, but it shows up in your social media. It shows up in your emails. It shows up anywhere where you're showing up, because your energy, your essence gets transmitted through all of these channels. So your essence has to be at a high frequency.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really glad we're having this conversation because we really stand for self-love here on High Five and It. Do the self-loving thing. You know, there's probably a more gentle approach. You don't have to go all in on day one. Like, you really do want to be feeling safe enough so that you can still be in your creative vibes and feel expansive and open and not have that energy of neediness and desperation and just feeling unsafe, because I mean, that just doesn't work for creating anything good or new. Like, for me, if I'm stressed, whether it's financially or otherwise, like, I can't really tap into my psychic gifts so well. I can't really create anything from inspiration, like, pretty much at all. And I'm just focused so much in the 3D that I just get like lost in that experience. So I definitely know what you're talking about. That's cool how you explained it from the science. I like that.
Yeah.
Do you have any more cool scientific facts or studies or things from the positive psychology angle that you could add to this point for anyone who's wanting to make the shift?
Yeah. So here's one of my fun facts. Gratitude is one of the best frequencies to show up in every single day. But you know how there's the whole make a gratitude list every single day, right? Well, it turns out, the research bears this out, that there's an optimal dosage of gratitude, which is twice a week.
Tell
Just
me
twice a
more.
week.
Okay.
Because think about it. If you've probably tried this. I know I have. Okay, I'm going to start a gratitude list. I'm going to do something I'm grateful for every single day. And then you do it for like 2 days in a row. And then day 3, you're like, ooh, I don't know what I'm grateful for. You have a crappy day or whatever it is, and it's hard. So then you skip a day, and then now it's day 4. And now you're like, ooh, I don't, I screwed it up already. Do I start over? So you start feeling bad about yourself rather than feeling grateful, which is the point. So if you can just make a gratitude list twice a week, that actually has a better effect on your whole system than it does to do it every single day. So optimal dosage for gratitude list twice a week.
Hey there. We hope you're enjoying this episode so far, but if you want to listen to the whole thing, we're going to invite you over to our podcast. Either search for High Vibin' It on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you guys listen to podcasts, or even better, if you want to watch the extended video version of this episode that's even longer than the actual podcast itself, head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/highvibe. Lindsay, tell them what's awesome about the Patreon.
Patreon is where we have all of our extended episodes. As Kelsey said, we have it on video, so you can actually see the things that we're talking about. Sometimes we have visual aids, and it's nice to know what we're talking about. We also have hangouts that we do sometimes that are exclusive to Patreon people. And you can get started with all of this and bonus content and everything that we have only for the Patreon people for as little as $3. I think it's $3.33 a month. And that's it. And you guys can get all the benefits and all access to everything that we put in there. Really cool.
It's really cool, really fun, super easy to join. And you guys don't even have to do that to finish this episode. If you're like, screw it, I don't want to pay any money, I just want to hear the rest of this episode, go to our podcast, High Vibin' It, search for it wherever you listen. It's totally free. Either way, enjoy the rest of the show wherever you choose to enjoy it. And we will see you guys next week because we do a new one every week. Adios.
Bye. you.